Hello children of the Most High, welcome back to Marie Speaks God's Grace Bible Study. I pray others truly enjoy today's Bible study and they get something out of it. So as always, get your coffee, get your tea, and let's get into our Torah, Tanakh, and history. I know with every single Bible study and Tanakh study and history study, I learned something out of it, how I can apply the Torah and Tanakh better to my life, how I can better serve HaShem, and how I can honestly just be a better human being. I pray others share this video, get it out, and what you're like. If there's any questions, we can research together. That's always fun. But as always, with God's will and grace, we will gather together again and learn some more very, very soon. That time, the shofar blew at Capitol Hill. It was September 27th, 1965, the first day of Rosh Hashanah, 5726. It was truly a Yom HaZikaron, a day of remembrance. This was the first day that the Jewish religious service was being held in the United States Capitol building. As we entered the building, the House of Representatives, I followed my host, Mr. Herbert Tenzer, to our destination, the Congressional Mediation Room. This small, non-denominational, dimly lit room, situated behind the frame of rotunda, and had been set aside to serve for us a sanctuary. Through the efforts of John McCormack, the Speaker of the House, his chief assistant William Fishbait Miller, the Congressman Tenzer, and his staff, this room had been converted into a makeshift but beautiful house of worship. Our little synagogue included an ark made from a discarded bookcase, two large lovely golden menorahs, an altar draped with purple velvet curtains, and a beautiful Tenzer Torah crown, which was perched on a windowsill overlooking the altar, a reader's table, a special mahogany lantern, two bouquets of flowers, and a special table for Tel Ilatem, Mitzoraim, and Yor Chomas. The 25 lettered back seated seats. When we had an informal but large plants placed between the men's and women's section, this was a voluntarily respected and used by women present. When we arrived at 8:45 a.m., it was heartening to find several of my congregations already assembled. The services were scheduled to start at 9 a.m. They had been to conclude at 12 noon, owing that the schedule would roll call vote. Therefore, it was essential that we keep on a plan scheduled. We recited our prayers However, when we reached the Ha-Malech prayer, which commences the morning services, we had achieved our acquired minyan, the first successful congressional quorum call of the day, with Congressman Tenzer and Moulter serving as a Gab Boyim. The host, Mike Bollane, Mr. Townsend's aide, serving as his sexton, the two guards outside the closed doors to restrict entrance to uninvited guests, and this was for invited guests only, their service started. The conscious of the intimacy of the congregation, I started the Chamelech prayer on a low tone note. By the time I reached Sher Cham Ma'alot prayer, I was in full voice as I executed the traditional high holiday liturgation chants. My numeratical small congregation joined in frequently in tones and vaguely familiar to them. I emphasized a few minor prayers while using a straight nushach for other prayers. I didn't omit any prayers, yet I was able to keep our time in limitations. Mr. Tenzer kept his assembly informed periodically of the page in the machzar being covered by the prayers, and they were recited. I placed paper clips in their machzar and the pages where I felt announcements were necessary. In this way, our efforts were effectively coordinated. The Torah service was brief since we limited ourselves to one general Meshe blessing. Aryeh Ma'adiam Biyom, a young family member of the Tenzars, read the Torah capably. He and his bride of 3 weeks had accompanied me from New York. Despite the aid of transliterated Torah blessings cards, many of my distinguished congregants had to struggle through reciting of the blessings when called to Torah. The invitations that were extended specifically indicated that the Reformed and Conservative Maksorim would be available for others of those who used them, but I noticed that all the worshipers using the Orthodox Maksorim. The people had started the service with the other Mitzorim, but had quickly switched and found that they could readily follow the service in the Orthodox Metzor. Instead of the usual sermon, Congressman Moulter read a special message from the President Johnson, and Congressman Tenzer read the prayer to our government. They were flanked by Senator Rabbi Chof and Congressman Friedel, each holding one of the Torah scrolls. The shofar sounded the ceremony, and it seemed to outweigh much of the rest of the services in its effect on those assembled. Upon returning the Torah scrolls after the shofar sounding, I noticed an additional member of my congregation had slipped into the services and was standing solemnly in the back row. I approached him on my exertion around the room. His face appeared vaguely familiar. At first glance, he looked like a typical old shul yud. But soon I recognized the distinguished visitor, Speaker of the House John W. McCormack. With his white yarmulke perched on his equally white mane of hair, he solemnly kissed the Torah as I passed by with the talith he had donned. He remained for but half an hour and displayed a great deal of respect for our humble services. Upon the conclusion of the services, a spontaneous service of highly complimentary and short speeches were made. And concerning the services, the participants in the joint efforts of the Congressman Tenzar and the yeshiva of the university was making in arrangements. Senator Rabbi Kolf spoke on behalf of the Senate, and Congressman Moulter on behalf of the House, and Congressman Halpern on behalf of the Republican minority, and Congressman Tenzer on behalf of all others. He also announced that the Speaker had asked for reports of all the congressmen that had been placed in the Congressional Record and the National Archives. Thus, we had truly written and participated in the page of American history. They were all invited to a Tinzer-sponsored Kaddish in the speaker's private dining room in the Capitol building. Although most of my congressional congrats had to go to the House of Chambers for their initial attendance roll call, I headed for the speaker's dining room. Although somewhat conspicuously because of my white yarmulke and a large tallit bag, I confidently strolled through the rotunda of the crowds and corridors, and two Tinzer's aides at my side and several reporters trailing behind. In a few moments, my legislative Balale Batim returned from the full call and listened to my recitation of the Kaddish for the wine. I passed around the Kaddish cup, and each person was able to partake in the wine in this manner. Carl, the speaker's personal butler, who served the Kaddish and lunch, which worked for a kosher caterer, had learned many of the traditional food customs. He refused to open the closet where the kosher wine had been put until I arrived, since he had been taught that only the Masirach, pronounced Moskrito, should be allowed to handle the wine. He partook of the gefilte fish, cake, honey, tagelech, and similar snacks. The Kaddish ended when we heard a buzz signal for the quorum call. The signal was arranged by a fish bait miller, was subsequently given the unofficial title of honorary sexton of the Congressional Synagogue. A holiday meal, mainly kosher frozen food meals that were brought with us from New York, were served in the speaker's dining room. Emmanuel Seller joined our group for lunch, making the total 10 the first day. Congressman Moulter, obviously inspired by the spirit of Rosh Hashanah, had been engendered by our services and initiated the day's debate in the House with a traditional greeting, Lashana Tova Teko Shevo. The procedures of the services of the first day were basically repeated in the second day, except for the public aspect, which seemed to die down. Special guests at the services included the chaplain of the House, Congressman Bingham, and a Gentile congressman from the Bronx. Although most of the fanfare was absent, the spirit and morale of the worshipers remained at a high pitch. How the Sunny Bar Institute, an incredible chapter in American Jewish history. As for the fighting in Europe drew to a close at the World War II, the Jewish Agency girded for the stiffening resistance against Britain. The confident one way or another, she would ultimately be forced out of Palestine. In anticipation of this, eventually, and the likelihood of war with the Arab states would follow, the Jewish Agency moved to mobilize Palestine Jewry and to flood Palestine with illegal immigrants. In March 1945, a secret meeting in Paris began. Several of the Sunni-born introduced each man. Ben Gurion in turn presented 3 key advisors he had brought along. Eliezer Kaplan, treasurer of the Jewish Agency, Dr. Yaakov Dorei, the trained engineer and Haganah, chief of staff, and Reuven Shelolah, chief of Haganah, intelligence, and later minister to Washington. Also on hand was Mayor Witzigal, confidant of Chaim Wissingman. There was no assembly atmosphere and no formal agenda. The monitor Ricard Sonneborn acted as the chairman. Everyone sat where he was supposed to. Each man spoke, but the room was charged with an electric air of excitement, even though the real purpose of the gathering was somewhat vague. What the assembly leaders heard from Ben Gurion was a long speech, and it seemed that the time was remote and from reality and tempered with visionary hopes. Sonneborn said some years later, "Yet everything Gurion predicted in a remarkable frank analysis of the Jewish position turned out to be unerringly accurate. The Labour Party would win in the upcoming parliamentary elections in England, but this would not alter British policy in Palestine. England would yield the mandate before too long, and the Jews would then seize the opportunity to create an independent state. The British would interfere, and the Arabs would resist through their widespread attacks on Jewish communities, and the open warfare would ensue. The Yishuv had a best 2 years to prepare its defenses and increase the manpower to a massive illegal immigration from the DP camps and the use of Palestine. If they had tanks, heavy artillery, planes, guns, we could defeat the Arabs. To arm the Yishuv, Ben Gurion proposed an immediate expansion of its tiny munitions industry and stockpiling in Egypt for later use in Palestine from the heavy stuff that could not be brought in while England retained control of the country. Dorei pointed out that once the Japanese were defeated, immense quantities of surplus arms-making machinery and military hardware would become available in the United States at bargain prices. Kaplan spelled out the potential cost of such purchases, and Shelolah sketched the methods of which the arms could be obtained and smuggled into Palestine. Having taken his rampant listeners into his confidence, Ben Gurion invited them to create an American arm of Haganah. He merely hinted at what they would be asked to do and gave them no clues as to who would be asking. All he told them was to be ready to move discreetly and boldly when called upon to bring into their circle other like-minded men and women throughout the country. No one in the room made any formal pledge or promise, but neither did no one demur. All sensed they had become a part of something historic, and implicitly they agreed to make themselves available without reservations for the mission Ben Gurion had outlined. The all-day meeting adjourned with a formal word of warning not to divulge the names of Ben Gurion, Shelolah, Dorei, and Kaplan as having been present. Anyone who claims to have total recall of the meeting is pretending information he does not have, the monitor says, because no notes of any kind have been taken. Since there was no official record of what had taken place, Sonneborn's apartment, some people not present have had their reputations enhanced by recording themselves as among being the participants, the monitor told the authors. Monitor's list of participants July 1st, made available the first time in this article, contains the following names besides his own: Sanebar, Ben Gurion, Kaplan, Dori, Sheolach, the Waynesgal, Shepherd Broad, Miami, Florida, Abe Berkoswicks, Montgomery, Alabama, Ulysses Fegilman, Los Angeles, California, Max Livingston, New Haven, Connecticut, Dr. Jacob C. Shohan and Joel Gross, Newark, New Jersey, Charles Goodworth and Jacqueline Todzexner, New York, New York, Ezra Shapiro, Cleveland, Ohio, Harold J. Goldenberg, Minneapolis, Minnesota, William S. Cohan, St. Louis, Missouri, Charles J. Rosenblum, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, William H. Zilk, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, James L. Permut, Birmingham, Alabama, Martin Abe Love, Utica, New York, and Albert Schniff, Columbus, Ohio. Out of the July 1st meeting was born the nameless nationwide secret movement that had become an American section in Haganah. This operations begun in early fall of 1945 after the British Foreign Secretary Ben Venn confirmed Ben Gurion's prediction that the new Labour government would not budge from the 1939 White Paper. One morning in September, Sunay Bourne received a mysterious telephone call from an Englishman who said, "I'm trying to locate Sunay Bourne Institute. Perhaps you can help me." Unwillingly, the caller had coined a cover name. Sunay Bar gave no sign of recognition but agreed to meet for lunch. The man was Sir Simon Marks, one of Weizmann's young associates in 1917, who handed Sunay Barn a terse four-letter message from David Ben Gurion: "The time has come." The next day, Sunay Bar Institute opened its headquarters in an unmarked office at 250 West 57th Street. Similar unidentified branches were established in major cities, all financed by an original group of 16. Each of them co-opted trustworthy associates who recruited collaborators of their own. Within a fortnight, entire country was covered by a network of volunteer committees whose secret parlor meetings gave their activities a conspiratorial character. The movement had no officers, no directors, and no letterhead. Its unofficial leader was Sunay Bourne, who presided at the meetings with the high command every Thursday at 12:30 p.m. in a private dining room of the Hotel of the Mech Alpine. Visitors from Palestine brought confidential instructions, and the Institute leaders from all around the country reported on how things were going. The Institute's first assignment was a private funding raising efforts to raise more than $1 million for the purchase of shipment of machinery, tools, dyes, and blueprints for the Yeshuv's munitions industry. Armed with specifications, a cadre of Haganah experts headed by General Dori and Hyman Savin, director of the Hidden Defense Factories, fanned out over the country. For months, they secured scrap metal yards, used machinery lots, Army and Navy stores, surplus ammunition dumps, and government offices, disposing of the World War II material, snatching up whatever was available. The Sunay Bar Institute paid the bills and set up intricate channels through which the staff reached its destination. Every crate got by the British customs inspectors, and some of the contents were still being used in the Six-Day War of 1967. The second undertaking involved a Sunnibar Institute in helping Haganah locate and buy and transport guns, used planes, ammunition, and explosives. This was not yet illegal, but it was carried out in secret because the British security agents were doing all they could do to thwart it. The actual arms smuggling was done by a tidy-knit group of Haganah agents who arrived in New York in 1947. They included Zev Sheng, father of the Israeli merchant marine, Chai Issachar, builder of the El Al Israel Airlines, Shlomo Shamer, organizer of the Israeli Navy, Yehuda Azrai and his twin brother Tuvia, and Teddy Kolech, later mayor of Jerusalem. Kolech was the coordinator of the funds using, also in charge the main purchasing center. In the Hotel Empire at Broadway and 63rd Street, he found the Irish settlers in New York's waterfront helpful allies in getting arms out of the country because of their traditional dislike of the British. Haganah's New York base was next door to the Copacabana and the same hotel where Ben Gurion had been monitored. Several suites and rooms in conspicuous hotels were reserved for Haganah's emissaries under a variety of allies. The location was extremely handy because of the proximity to the Jewish Agency headquarters, then on the East 66th Street. In the Hotel 14, Yehuda Azrai, chief organizer of the arms procurement program, recruited his most important American agent, Adolf A.I. Schmitzmer. In World War II ferry commanded pilot, Schmitzmer became known as Haganah while serving in TWA flight engineer. With Ray Schnock, the William Shatner, he brought a reconditioned scrap transport planes from surplus U.S. war stocks and set up a cover organization. Schmitzmer Aviation Company enlisted his mechanics, pilots, and gunners. The planes often flew to operations base in Burbank, California, where Bill Gerson and A.I. Arubak, U.S. Air Force veterans, and unnamed retired U.S. Marine Air Force Major supervised their overhauling. Eleanor Rudnick, owner of the fleet and crop dusting planes, made her private airport south of Los Angeles available for testing the crew training by Leo Gardner, son of a rabbi, and the World War II U.S. pilot Sam Lewis, a flying buff. In Honolulu, Zoomer contacted a dealer of large supply and spare engine parts and the surplus arms. The machine guns flew in from Hawaii in crates labeled engines, narrowly escaping the search of the FBI agents in Burbank. Swimmer and Azrai enlisted Hank Greenspun, a New York-born Nevada newspaper publisher and World War II combat officer, for his brief but fantastic career as a gun runner. Before Greenspan was through, he plundered a naval depot in Hawaii, acquired an airport and 2 airlines in Panama, and posed successfully as a confidential agent in Shanghai, Kai-shek in Mexico. When he was arrested, he pleaded guilty to violation of Neutrality Act in order to spare Haganah embarrassment. His exploits cost him his citizenship and a fine of $10,000, but he was later pardoned. Others too risked reputations in desperate effort to arm Haganah. Some Jewish manufacturers slipped non-explosive war materials into cartons of export goods that eventually turned up in Haganah's warehouses. Social workers and rabbis were among the active participants in collection of pots and pans, a euphemism for guns, trucks, small arms, and drill pressers that reached Haganah's piecemeal for collection points in New York, Florida, and California. Haganah's wars material was often stored temporarily in basements of public buildings, synagogues, Jewish community centers, and Hillel foundations labeled Czech-Slovak cookery. Teamsters unions, local corporations, and trucking heavy items to ports. One fundraising pitch that had added 40 used army trucks to Haganah's arsenal was made before the crowd of crapshooters in a singular of Midwestern City Hall. Consorted to the grace by one city leader's criminal lawyers, Sunny Bar Institute agent. The social worker who made the appeal was told he could have everything in the next 10 pots. From time to time, high school and college students were arrested on charges of illegal possessions of pistols and rifles, and they were caching for Haganah in the loft buildings and factories of private homes. One of these, Joseph Untermeyer, son of the poet Louis Untermeyer, was acquitted after a passionate defense by Paul O. Duyor. The former presidential yacht USS Mayflower, which had acquired from Haganah, was loading guns in Panama when the Panamanian government withdrew its registry at the request of the U.S. Embassy. Directly or indirectly, virtually in every Jewish organization was linked with Sunny Bar Institute and its many auxiliaries, but few talked about it. Worshippers in the congregation Sons of Israel, Woodmere, Long Island, on Friday night, May 14th, heard their rabbi, Irving Miller, describe the first time what Jews of Woodmere, Lawrence, Hewlett, and Cedarburg had been doing for many months to procure arms and war materials for Haganah. Without mentioning names, he revealed the existence of a shortwave radio transmitter board that the Jewish-owned yacht anchored in Hewitt Harbor. It had been part of the communications networks through the Haganah arms buyers in the United States received their orders from Paris and Tel Aviv. Aboard the same yacht, Moshe Sharet, Jewish agency's chief negotiator at the United Nations, often met with friendly delegations. More than one Jewish radio amateur was admonished by the FCC for sending and receiving messages on behalf of Haganah in technical violations of international treaty governing radio communications. British intelligence and Arab spokesmen operated for Truman's organizations, and they had recognized Israel. At 10:28 p.m. on May 14, 1948, this amateur contracted station ZC61A in Tel Aviv and talked to Joseph Barer. He was the engineer who had patched together the underground Haganah transmitter from the bits and pieces left over by the British dismantled official government station. The Americans reached Bared several times between 10:35 p.m. and 11:25 p.m. East EDT, 3:35 a.m. and 5:25 a.m. Tel Aviv time, May 15th. He also managed to raise the ZC-6XY operator in the U.S. consulate in Jerusalem. A second mayor, Constantine Project of Sunny Bar Institute, provided ships and crews for the Brigade agents smuggling refugees out of Europe via tiny ports in France, Italy, and the Balkans. It began with the purchase of a pair of corvettes from Canadian government, manned almost entirely by former American merchant marine seamen and GIs and outfitted surpluses. The U.S. Navy equipped the two 925-ton vessels delivered by 5,200 Jews in Palestine before being captured by the British. One unloaded its first cargo in the high seas onto a small craft that was made a second round trip before being caught. All told, Sunny Bar organization brought 18 ships that carried over 75,000 Jews to Palestine illegally. One of its purchases was the Exodus 1947, for whose the dedication of Baltimore Harbor 1947, some of the Institute leaders made a rare public appearance. Other groups made noisy claims to credit, but the Institute did not deny them without risking exposure. Doggedly and annoyingly anonymously, it continued this phase for its work without recognition or desire for it. When private fundraising for Haganah had discontinued at the beginning of 1947 because it was producing only a small part of what was needed, the Sunny Bar Institute switched to public activity. At the end of 1947, Eliezer Klapan, the Jewish Agency Treasury, had returned to Tel Aviv from the United States with a depressing report on the prospects of subsequential funds for arms. Ben Gurion wanted to leave for the United States at once with Kaplan, but he was overruled, and Mrs. Golda Meir took on the assignment. In an emotional, drenched speech before the General Assembly of the Council of the Jewish Federation and the Welfare Funds in Chicago, late in January 1948, she described the dangers of the yeshiv's face unless it were adequately armed. She asked for an immediate $25 to $30 million, 5 times what Kaplan had said was possible, to enable the Rosh to buy what its purchasing missions had already taken options on. Her listeners, her key leaders in the organization of Jewish funds raising grasped but quickly provided the cash through bank loans secured by the future contributions of local fundraising campaigns. In this way, $28 million became available to the Haganah in the next 4 months through the 1948 campaign of the United Jewish Appeal, who on behalf of the federations outside the New York raised the bulk of their money. When the chief of the Rosh mission in Paris, Cabot could buy tanks for if he had $10 million. He was instructed to close the deal. Similar news went to Prague, where negotiations were underway for plans and heavy guns. On Ms. Meir's return to Palestine, Ben-Gurion said, "Someday when history will be written, it will be said there was a Jewish woman who got the money which made the state possible." On February 16, 1948, Sanibar wrote in his collaborators that certain confidential activities carried out for 2.5 years were ended with the successful accomplishment of the mission. That same day, he assumed open leadership of the newly incorporated Materials for Palestine, which collected immense quantities of non-contraband goods through the campaign of cash or gifts in kind. Thousands of volunteers engaged in fundraising projects for the new organization, which provided the Yeshuv with ambulances, medical supplies, hospital equipment, blood plasma, clothing, and shoes made and available to Haganah, heavy trucks, jeeps, barbed wire, steel sheeting, rubber tires, tents, field glasses, mesh kits, wire cables, burlap bags, and making of sandbags, compressing and field telephones. After May 14th, Materials for Palestine became Materials for Israel, which was succeeded by the Israel Purchasing Missions in the United States. Well, children of the Most High, ever-loving, living God, I hope others truly got something out of this Bible study. I hope this Bible study has blessed others. I hope this Bible study has been an education process. I do pray that you are on your way, because it is a lifetime learning process. Believe you me, go get yourself your own favorite version of the Torah. I suggest to others the Bluestone Torah. This is one. After you have gotten your own Torah, get a Tanakh. Keep reading and keep studying. Get involved. Find out where your local synagogue is. Go and find a rabbi. Go to your local synagogue. Start going to classes. Start learning and start living and loving the one and true and only living God. Please remember to like, heart, subscribe, or share. You can always subscribe to our blog. Go to our website, mariespeaksgodsgrace.live, because we serve a living God. You can get our emails from there, and we will not spam your email address. 100%. Keep up to date with us on our social media. If you would like, we like to share what we're interested in, maybe something that's inspiring, maybe something that we're working on, increasing in our knowledge in. That's always fun. Or a new book. Hello. Anyhow, I hope others enjoy the Bible study. I hope others have been taking time together and just increasing in our relationship with our merciful Hashem. So, like, heart, subscribe, and share. And until next time, we will see each other.
May Hashem bless you. May Hashem keep you. May we all be forever written in the book of life. Amen.